What was your experience like with The Division 1? Did you join in at launch or later on? For me, it was the latter. I finally pulled the trigger on The Division 1 during the middle of 2018, once all of the major updates and changes occurred. I had a great time right from the beginning of the story to the grind afterward, and racked up over 100 hours in a short span of time. It was fun, different from what I was used to, and it had an overall good storyline. Were there things that still weren't great and became annoying the more you faced them? Absolutely. But there was something about The Division that made it manageable to a point. Then there was, of course, the announcement of The Division 2, which also helped. When I heard about The Division 2, I felt a mixture of excitement and slight disappointment. I was excited to see how they would improve on the framework they had created and tweaked so much. I was slightly disappointed that they would make it a completely separate game from The Division 1, especially since the game hadn't been out for that long. Their reasoning for a completely separate game? In an interview, Ubisoft said that due to technological improvements to the game engine, the one The Division 1 used, alongside with what they wanted to do with the game in the future, it made more sense to make it a separate game, built on the improved engine. This got me thinking about all the changes they could make to recapture their lost audience, and also garner the attention of a new player base. My wish list to Ubisoft. Hey Ubi. Number 1. Make enemies more complex, and have the environments become more integral into the fights you faced. Put the investment into each encounter and make them feel as unique as you can. Essentially, get away from the original version of the elites and bosses that were just pure bullet sponges. Number 2. Change up the original movement mechanics throughout the environment, as they feel jerky and not as smooth as other games. I want to feel like I can easily move through a location, especially in hectic fights. I want to feel like my movement is working with me rather than against me. Many times in The Division 1, it feels like the character is wrapped in Velcro, and that Velcro attaches itself to every bit of the nearby environment. Number 3. Rework the pathing for enemy NPCs to make them have less erratic movement and have them act more intelligent on their actions. The enemy's flanking is good, but they overall still feel a bit mindless rather than strategic in their movement. Number 4. Add on new skills and alter some of the existing ones. Include skills that can deliver both offensive and defensive elements. Add other offensive skills that can be altered so we can change between crowd control and specific targeting. Number 5. Make the weapons, beyond specific ARs and SMGs, feel more viable in fights. Number 6. Further improve on the overall graphics, including the environmental lighting and elemental effects, for example, fire and smoke. And number 7. Bring in more options for live events so you can bring players together to face a common enemy without the need to be in a pre-existing group. So, what did we end up getting? I've been playing The Division 2 since closed alpha, and I've had some thoughts. I've had to wait, however, for NDAs to lift and to reach open beta time. The official release is now less than 2 weeks away, or even less than that if you purchase the Season Pass. Before we jump into my impressions, let's get something straight. Breaking down the word, beta. Using the word beta at this stage of development is a very loose term. Unfortunately, a loose term that most AAA developers and publishers use to give an excuse for potentially unfinished or broken elements of a game. A game that at this point has already been mailed out to physical locations. The Division 2 is already en route to your favorite neighborhood game store, so the core elements that you see and experience in the beta are what you're already going to get when you buy the game. There are certain mechanics and fundamentals of a game that a game developer can't simply just patch up with a digital update. Don't use beta as an excuse for incomplete elements. It's important to remember this, since many players who build up a lot of hype for a game's potential often use the excuse "it's in beta" to overlook flaws or lack of updates in a game. Now, let's get into the voiceover and interactions in The Division 2. NPC interactions and voiceover are the core of what you'll experience, especially in hubs. The goal of NPC interactions and their voiceover is to deliver context to the player and bring an area to life in a natural way. In The Division 2, people barely spoke to each other. I walked through crowded areas and felt like the NPCs didn't realize there were other NPCs around them. But they sure noticed me. Though the NPCs typically ignored most other NPCs, They were all enthusiastically willing to talk with me to the point of me wanting to pull my hair out. When I first arrived at the theater district, the only noises I heard, which were constant, were,
Agent, you here to check in?
We owe you big time, Agent. Hey, Agent, you're the best.
You checking up on us, Agent?
Over here, Agent.
Now, I'm not saying NPCs shouldn't talk to us, as players, or randomly about us while we're standing 2 inches in front of them, but the rate to which that happened was maddening. Also, did you all know we're agents? The constant chatter and callouts became beyond frustrating when specific NPCs were trying to provide information on side missions and the main storyline, only to have yet another NPC shouting at me, interrupting the immersion. This verbal clutter smacked me in the eardrums to remind me, hey, you're playing a game. Hey, agent, forget about our leader's daughter being kidnapped. Talk to me. Those NPCs suddenly turned into a 4-year-old sibling.
If you can help, I'll be on your debt. And I always pay my debts.
Look, there's that agent.
Vendors also had a comment for literally every action I took. If you find yourself with 20 items to sell to a vendor, have fun with that and bring earplugs. The commentary was pure filler with absolutely no purpose to any major bit of the game, and honestly, it came off as forced.
Nice seeing you again. Exactly what I needed. This works nicely. This fits the bill. That's just what I needed.
We're all in your debt, Agent.
I appreciate your business. That's quality merchandise.
It's this awkward dialogue that made things feel so much more artificial. Now, this isn't to say that some of these elements didn't also exist in the Division 1, but the hope I had was that there would be overall improvements to the game to make it worth the title of the Division 2, and not actually make it worse. The constant chatter makes it worse. Does this impact the overall mechanics of a looter shooter? No. But it does make the environment tougher to want to stay in it, and to put the hours in that's needed for a game like this. Now this brings me to the audio of the Division 2. When I was out in the field, the music and ambient noises were really nice. They have the same quality as the Division 1, which I thought were good, and helped to give a nice layer around the action rather than distract from it. It's amazing how the most basic of sounds and music can create such an emotional feeling during moments of discovery and moments of action. Both the Division 1 and 2 do a great job of making you feel like the pressure is on or that things seem pretty bleak depending on the situation. Beyond the audio, the next important elements are those that we see. Visual storytelling is huge in any game, and so it's important to have the right graphics and in-game lighting to help tell the story. I was really impressed with these elements in the Division 1, from the sunbeams streaking through the clouds giving us a sense of hope, to the ominous blacklight club areas within parts of the underground DLC. So how do these elements stack up in the Division 2? Ubisoft boasted graphical improvements in the Division 2, which were clearly evident from the first step I took in the game. The world looked sharper and more detailed than before, and changes in weather yielded more lighting elements. The colors seemed much more vibrant, though that doesn't always mean a graphical update, but more of a stylistic choice. And I'm pretty sure I could see moisture on my character after running around long enough. Yes, I was sweating. Unfortunately, with the lighting upgrades came some new visual issues that ultimately impacted the immersion and made things feel artificial. This was most obvious with the skin textures. Characters all looked shiny in the same way, no matter the skin tone, which made their appearance plastic-like. This was especially noticeable in certain cutscenes where instead of dark and gritty, they were overlit and shiny. But even as the characters themselves may have looked a little fake, the surrounding world didn't. As I traversed the map, I noticed there was a lot of details in the environment. Like, a lot. Trash, suitcases, papers, bags, plant life, assortments of vehicles, and much more. The amount of work the art department did, it's impressive. Though slightly claustrophobic at times, the detail did add a lot of visual character to make Washington, D.C. feel like a wasteland. There were just so many elements strewn across that let me know something big happened here. Now, this next point I realize is nitpicky, but after some time it really started distracting me. Within this gorgeous sea of detail, there were things that suddenly lacked any detail. For example, I saw characters using tablets, but the tablets clearly had black screens. Now, it wouldn't have been that bad if it wasn't for the fact that the NPCs were waving them around in the air in front of a super detailed backdrop. Did this sudden lack of detail happen in The Division 1? Sure, in certain places. But again, we're talking about the next installment of this Ubisoft franchise where their focus was to improve the graphics and details. Talking about the details in the world, there was a new element in The Division 2, which is the highlighting of, quote, monuments, or special locations within Washington, D.C. I would get near a monument and text would appear on the screen letting me know, hey, it was there, and I should press a button to focus in on it. It was an interesting feature to get a different visual angle on said monument, but it didn't seem to carry any major importance. It's not that it was bad, just sort of an odd thing to focus on. Maybe players wanted more history highlights within the world. After all, The Division 1 was also set in a historically rich locale. Either way, the system got to be a tad annoying, as it kept telling me that I had discovered monuments I had already found. I guess my character had short-term memory because I found the theater district every time I walked by. Talking about the theater district, just like in The Division 1, I was in charge of building out a hub with each mission I took on, in this case, the theater district. I've enjoyed this mechanic in many other games, and as long as Ubisoft can tie elements into the story and make the grind for building not feel ridiculous, it gives the players something to work toward. They even altered the donation system. So instead of donating random items to people in the streets, as in The Division 1, I was able to donate items to further the progress of the community. It's not a new system, but it does feel like a better use of it, and something that more players will actually use. Another familiar element is echoes. As in The Division 1, Ubisoft brought echoes back to help fill in parts of the history of past events. I think it's an interesting feature. Echoes give a bit more exposition, they bring in the emotions from people that witnessed the past events, and are good detective tools for specific missions. Echoes were great in The Division 1, but unfortunately in my playthrough of The Division 2, the mechanic itself didn't work so well. There were times where I couldn't activate the echo, or if I was able to, it wouldn't completely run the voiceover and animation, so it just remained an empty POI or point of interest on my HUD. One new game mechanic present in The Division 2 is control points. This is sort of like a live event that is activated by a player. I went to a specific point that was controlled by the local faction and fired off a flare to call the local militia to join me. These control points felt like a horde mode, with the end result being gear drops. Now, though it's a slightly different way of activating something in The Division 2, the fighting itself felt like every other fight in both games. Also, ally NPCs that joined me didn't do anything but slightly distract enemies for a second or two. Now, this resulted in these events being incredibly difficult, without the right level and gear, or without the support of other players. And maybe this was the objective. Maybe control points are meant to really be a team-based situation, or a situation where you just need the right gear and level. But thus far, playing in what I did for the open beta, it just was really rough. Now, I just mentioned the friendly AI and the enemy AI, so let's talk about the AI. This is where things start feeling way too similar to The Division 1. The initial enemies, the hyenas, felt like newly Mad Max skinned enemies from The Division 1. I faced the typical snipers, grenadiers, melee fighters, and elite gunners. The elites were not only still bullet sponges, but now came with even more sponge. Some could take a drug that gave them yet another bar of protection, a green bar below their health, on top of the insane armor they already had. Instead of making enemies more complex, more strategic, Ubisoft just added the same layers of mechanics that were in The Division 1 and in many other looter shooters. The enemy AI was repetitive and just not that smart in the actions they made. Then again, joining groups like those that call themselves the hyenas already puts their judgment into question. Every time I came across enemies fighting friendly NPCs, I would attack them, but they completely ignored me. These situations made what should have been moments of intensity boring. If you got shot in the side of the leg, or had a bullet whiz past your face, wouldn't you at least turn to see where the shot came from? And there were so many times when enemies would be under attack and thought it would be a good idea to stop shooting and instead to climb something, thus leaving them completely open to being shot. I cannot tell you the number of times I was shooting an enemy only for them to suddenly be overtaken by the urge to parkour. I'm also pretty sure the enemy AI practiced magic, because they could suddenly appear out of thin air. Multiple times I found myself being shot at by invisible enemies, or swarmed by a group of NPCs from an area I had just cleared out mere seconds ago. Now, the issues didn't just plague enemy AI, but also friendlies. There were missions, just like in the Division 1, where a specific allied NPC joined me in a fight, but there was no way to give them commands or for them to get a hint. When I tried to sneak in and take cover, they would just run up behind me and stand there. Not only was my cover blown, but if I needed to move, I had cover blocking me from the front and the friendly NPC blocking me from the back, thus placing me in a choke point that I didn't want to be in. Now see if they get a holiday card at the end of the year. Besides the human enemies, there were plenty of environmental obstacles to get through. These obstacles I had to either find a way around, over, or had to completely destroy. Go around, shoot a lock off a door, or destroy a door altogether to get to the next point of a mission. They aren't the most exciting tasks, but they do at least give traipsing around a space a bit more variety and realism. After all, it doesn't make sense for everything to be simply unlocked for you. My concern, though, is why were the doors bleeding? No joke, the destructible doors could bleed. Nothing pulls me out of the action quicker than an inanimate object bleeding, and me trying to explain to myself what's actually going on. That's just wet paint, right? Right? Now onto the tools of the trade, skills, weapons, and supplies. There were some new toys to play with, such as the chemical launcher, which was fun to use and could really help with crowd control as well as healing allies. There was also the drone, which seemed like a fun offensive device to hunt down enemies and push them back or force them to take cover. I also saw the return of such skills as the seeker mines and the turret, my Division 1 BFF. As before, there were different focuses for each skill to have them adapt to a specific playstyle, such as turning the turret into a sniper. Even with a few alterations, the skills that carried over from the Division 1 felt pretty much the same, and I could easily pick them up and use them. The new skills felt, well, new, and I just need to take a bit of time to figure out how and when to implement them. From the skills I saw and used, when in a group, these skills were able to create a very dynamic combat experience, whether on missions, raids, or in PvP situations. The weapons also felt just like in the Division 1. The shots felt satisfying to a point, but it still seemed like I was better off only using an assault rifle and SMG. Weapons like shotguns were typically ignored, even though the reload was much faster on them, in comparison to the assault rifles. The shotgun spread seemed to be small and didn't mix well with the erratic movement of the enemies up close. Also, this could have been just me, but the reload time on the assault rifles just felt like it dragged on for much longer than they should have, especially in comparison to all other games that I used an assault rifle in. I would be caught up in an intense gunfight only to suddenly need to dance around for cover while I reloaded. I'm not sure if giving ARs longer reload times was Ubisoft's way of getting players to start using other weapons, or if it was just an oversight, but either way, it needs to be reviewed. Finally, I saw the outing of medkits and the introduction of armor kits into the Division 2. So instead of focusing on regaining health, the focus was on regaining armor while actively in a fight. Now, if I survived the battle, that's when my health would then naturally regenerate. Now, it took a few seconds for my character to regain the armor from the kit. After all, the animation was of the character replacing the armor plating in the vest. The speed of the animation felt good as it made me strategize when and where was a good time to use it. So finally on to the highs and lows of the lows and highs, otherwise the conclusion. The Division 2 felt a lot like the Division 1.5 in a shinier package. I wanted to be excited by this game and to be amped up about every single encounter. Unfortunately, it just made me think about my experiences in The Division 1 rather than having me immersed in The Division 2. Now, does this mean The Division 2 is a bad game? No, but it doesn't make it a great sequel. If you've never played The Division 1, The Division 2 can be pretty cool. But if you've been actively playing The Division 1, I would suggest waiting until The Division 2 is on sale, or wait for a free weekend to see where the game has gone at that point. This game still has a lot of potential, but at this point, we need to start focusing on what we're given as gamers rather than the platitudes and hopeful what-ifs. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed our review of The Division 2, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when more reviews, gameplay, and interviews go live from us at MindMine TV.